do that. Okay, so again, this is our grad school panel hosted by the Political Science Department and the Campus to Capital program. And our panelists, if you don't mind, when you begin to talk about your experiences, if you could just state your name and what you're doing now, that would be really helpful. And touch on as many of those questions as you can, and we'll have time for questions at the end. So with that, let's start with Victoria, if you don't mind.
Sure. Okay, so my name is Victoria Cook, and I currently work with CAT at the New Jersey General Assembly Majority Office as a policy analyst. I'm new there, and I came from a different agency in the state, the Office of Management and Budget before that. So I got my NPA, and I guess I'm class of 2019. So before that, so I graduated class of 2015 from TCNJ, and I was a sociology and Spanish major. So, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I fortunately had an advisor who recommended that I apply for a position with a state senator's office. So I got that job, and that's when I really learned what I wanted to do, and that I wanted to be in public service and in government specifically. So I worked for a legislative office as a legislative aide for a little over 2 years before going back to school. So I can honestly say that I would not be where I am now if I didn't have my degree, but my MPA. But I also really think that my years working in between going back for my MPA were really, really important, and helped me just immensely, like not only with the application process, but just while I was there, being able to manage the work and really know what I wanted out of my degree going forward. So in terms of the application process, I looked, my first research programs that would be good for government work, and what schools offered what types of degrees. But ultimately for me, it came down to what school had the best work study programs to offer their students. So when I went back for my MPA, I went to the University of Delaware because they had a great program where I could work and receive a stipend and also still go to school full time. So, and I also got really valuable experience there. I worked for the Delaware legislature. I worked for the Delaware Office of Management and Budget, and I also did some research with the Delaware research institutions there. So a tip or advice that I would give, I mean, I would really think about maybe if you can work and before going to school, I would recommend it. I think it just gives you a different perspective on what you're doing in a classroom, and it really gives you more focus than maybe some of the other people that you might be in a room with. I just think that especially for public service, experience means a lot. And Would I do it again? Absolutely. I would do it again. Um, I've found that the public administration degree, it's really flexible and broad, and I can make it whatever while I was attending school, I could make it whatever I wanted it to be. So I chose a path that was more policy focused and more focused on public finance than somebody else. Like my roommate there, she was focused on nonprofit management, so, and we were in the same degree program, which I think is really speaks to the degree and like the flexibility of it. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Victoria. Super, super helpful for kicking us off. And, if there are areas where those of you who come after, just, if there are things that you don't want to just repeat for repeating's sake, that's fine too, based on the way that we're doing this, answering all the questions at once. But that was super, super helpful, Victoria. And next, let's turn it to Nirali.
Great, thank you, Professor Char Talk. I am currently a 2L at Vanderbilt, so I might be in a similar like pre-finals manic mode as some of the undergrad here. And I'm just super thankful to Catherine for inviting me. Like, I think this is a great opportunity to reconnect with my TCNJ network. I'll start with a little bit of background on me. I graduated in 2016 from TCNJ, and I double majored in poli-sci and economics. I'd crafted my college studies with an eye toward law school, and I knew I wanted to use that degree to work in the public sector and help advance racial justice causes. But probably in my junior or senior year, I figured out that there really was no template or established path to doing that work as a lawyer. Like, there's no list of criteria you can follow to become a staff attorney at the ACLU, right? So to give myself some time to come up with a solid game plan, I decided, like Victoria, to get some full-time experience. I wanted to do social justice advocacy work, and luckily my studies at TCNJ gave me the right tools for that. I knew how to handle data, I knew how to write persuasively, and I knew how to analyze complex policy materials. I then ended up working full-time for 4 years at advocacy orgs and issues like campaign finance reform, voting rights, and higher education access. And those 4 years weren't part of like some grand plan, like it just kind of shook out that way. I was someone who was really motivated in a work setting to get really substantive research and writing projects, and really make the impression that I could create really high caliber products. And that ended up, with me working many overtime nights, and that obviously detracted from law school applications and ended up stretching out the gap between my undergrad and law school. But whenever I could find time outside of school, I spent it studying for the LSAT. That was a process that took me 2 years. I was getting my rec letters together. I was having people look over my application essays and researching schools and scholarships. I also found time to volunteer with the National Lawyers Guild on a prisoners' rights project, just to break up the monotony of a constant 12-hour work days for, as I said, several years. And frankly, remind myself of my end goal, which is to one day have the expertise and power to help individuals and communities who have repeatedly been wronged by our nation's systems. So while I was at NLG, I was also working at the Brennan Center on really interesting democracy reform grassroots campaigns. So I was sort of steeped in this environment of movement lawyering, which is a type of legal practice where lawyers defer to organizers from directly impacted communities rather than insert their own legal expertise in that particular area. So it was really exciting to sort of be in an environment where I felt like I could just come back after getting my law degree and actually be in the position to lead a project. And I think that's the feeling that really motivated me to sort of hit submit on my very expensive applications and throw myself into the challenge of law school. Looking back on my journey to law school, I'd say my path was not at all conventional, but that's okay because the work I want to do as a lawyer isn't really conventional. So, I never worked as a paralegal at a private firm in that gap that I took because I don't see myself as a partner at a private firm. But I did take time to work with organizations who were involved in causes that I cared about so that I could put myself on track to become a concrete legal resource in the broader social justice movement. So I put together sort of like 3 questions that you should ask yourself if you're considering law school right now. And I'd urge you to think really seriously about them. And they're rather blunt, so sorry if they kind of hit hard. First, do you have the money to apply to and attend law school? I found that applications and the LSAT were really expensive, especially because you'll probably end up taking the LSAT more than once. So that ends up being like thousands of dollars. If you want to take test prep courses or work with a tutor, that's even more money. One of the great benefits of working prior to law school is that you can start saving for those costs as well as tuition and living expenses once you actually start school full time. And then law school debt could probably be a panel discussion all in itself. So all I'll say there is really think of your debt in terms of how much you would be paying out of your monthly or biweekly paycheck once you're working as a lawyer. Second, ask yourself, do you have an idea of the type of law that you want to practice? So you will have some time in law school to figure out your interests, but I will say there's a huge advantage to knowing your direction ahead of time. This is because law school is a really competitive environment and you're going to feel really pushed to do absolutely everything under the sun. You're going to end up overworking yourself. So if you have a general idea of what your legal interests are, what your practice is going to look like, that way you can choose classes and opportunities that are really tailored to you. And then you're also going to spend a lot of time in law school applying to internships and externships. So knowing your path ahead of time can really help cut the stress. So for example, I'm somebody who knows they want to do public interest or public service, as we say it here. And I still end up sending 60 to 80 applications per semester, applying for internships for the next semester or the next summer. And then the third question you want to ask yourself is, do you really want to go to law school? I know I posed it as a very existential question, but I promise it's a question that can be answered with ample research. So if you're someone who's interested solely in government and policy, a lot of the time you'll find that a master's in public policy or statistics is more fitting. I don't recommend getting a JD just to pad your resume for that big shot, staffer job on the Hill. You can learn how to read a statute through various other degree programs. In law school, you won't be grappling with policy questions or directly challenging systemic inequality. You're going to be reading old case law written overwhelmingly by white male elites to understand core legal doctrine. And I think that if you're a student of color, that's something to really internalize and think about before you take the leap. I would really only recommend the law school path if you're legitimately interested in litigating, representing clients, or you want to do public service work like legal aid, impact litigation, or legal advocacy in the nonprofit or government agency sphere. And the only way to really see if those things are an interest to you is talking to people in the legal world. Like I remember, cold emailing tons of people, and I was so surprised about the response rate there. So I think especially if you're a first gen student like myself, I think it would really just behoove you to get as much information as possible before actually applying. And yeah, I think that's all I have. I think I've gone on long enough about the pitfalls of law school, but I just want to emphasize that, it's a huge decision. Any grad school decision is a huge decision, especially financially. So definitely take it seriously. And I'm going to drop my email in the chat. So if anyone wants to talk one-on-one, I'm happy to get together.
Thank you so much, Nirali. I think that was super informative. And yeah, I think this idea about different paths, that sort of theme of different paths to similar places is really helpful one to think about. Ish, if you don't mind going next, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us what you're up to.
Hey everyone, my name is Halton. Most people call me Ish for short. I graduated in 2019. I'm one of the few people, I'll talk about it later, that went straight through. So I went from TCNJ to Rutgers. to get my master's in public policy. I can touch on that now. I don't recommend. The application process was stressful because I was a philosophy major in undergrad. So I was writing my senior thesis my senior year, same time I was taking the GREs, a lot of writing / studying. But it was a good experience. I mean, prepared me for a master's program. It was very rigorous. But to give you a little bit more of a background about me, I started off in politics working as an aide to the Commissioner of Education around like 2018. Then I went over to legislative. I was working as a legislative aide to Senator Reynolds Jackson. That was a good time. I think one of the biggest reasons why my experience in grad school, I was able to kind of like keep up with my peers. I will say in grad school, when you don't take the age gap, I was the youngest person in my cohort, and you're probably going to be the youngest person in most of your classes. And a lot of people are going to have a lot more experiences that they can draw from, like in the classes, kind of speaking on it. So I will say that was a drawback, but because of my time at the Department of Education, and then because I was working as a legislative aide, as I was taking my classes, it wasn't like a huge thing, because like I always tell people I was like living what I was learning in real time. So application was just like very like crossing all given points. But I think one of the main reasons how I applied for the, because I started off wanting to go the law route, and then I was like, I heard about the billable hour, and I was like, I'm not doing this. I'm not paying for this. I'm not gonna pay all this money because I don't even want to practice law. I just being real with myself, and I stumbled into the DOE thing. I picked the Master's of Public Policy degree because, so I like the intersection of politics and policy. I like both. So can't really like get a Master's in public politics. So I was like, okay, let me go the policy route. And I got involved in like organizations like Mercer County Young Democrats and stuff like that to like kind of learn more about politics. And also in my day job as legislative aide, kind of learn about politics. So the MPP route for me kind of gave me the policy side, and then my experiences gave me the politics side, because I wanted to be at the intersection of both. So kind of picking the school for me was more of a strategic decision about where can I go. Also from my time at the DOE, the Eagleton Institute of Politics was like this huge thing that a lot of people that work in state government went to. So like for me, it's like, I think I applied to like 3 schools, like NYU, Rutgers, and I think like Princeton. It's like, okay, like what is the strategic value of me going to these schools? With the full plan that if I didn't get in, I was probably not just take the GRE again and then reapply. So going to school for me was a strategic decision about which one to get me best. I will say, so like Victoria said earlier, I had a master's public policy, but my concentration was in political processes and institutions. So I basically took all my classes at the Eagleton Institute. I was able to get in as a graduate fellow. So I took pretty much all of my like specialization classes. I learned class like gerrymandering, a class I was taught by the last like redistricting tiebreaker, and it was like preparing for this one. We learned class was like presidential transitions during a presidential election, when it was like people that ran Governor Christie's when he was running the transition for Trump at one point. So like very practical stuff. I will say the public policy degree choices, you do a lot of policy work, and have classes like education class, social policy class, but for the most part, they're teaching you research skills, how to like read and write research, summarize, and be able to interpret it. That's like the main focus of the degree, I would say, kind of being able to digest that academic information and turn it into policy. I think if I had to put a one-word summary, that's the main thing I learned. And then the Eagleton side was mainly the politics. Now I'm a public affairs associate at Kivit, or a communications and public affairs firm. So very full circle. I started off as philosophy, and I was a public policy person, and I ended up in public affairs. So you can see very fluid in my decisions. Would I do it again? I would probably take a gap year. If I did it again, I probably could increase my GRE scores. Because like I said, that last senior year taking the GREs, it was just a lot. It was a lot. I don't recommend it. And also the experience, like I think Victoria said earlier, that like legislative experience you get is so invaluable, because even like coming out of the a master's program, like having that experience, being able to do both at the same time really helped me to stand out from other candidates who were just like, did what I didn't just went straight through, because I had those additional experiences I was getting at the same time. I think that's pretty much it. I covered everything in a very roundabout way, but I'm happy to take any questions, and I can also drop my email in the chat.
Thank you so much. Super interesting path and route. and helpful at sort of rounding out the picture. And I think our last but not least is Geraldine to tell us about her experiences.
Hi, everyone. My name is Geraldine Quintero, and I'm currently a communications manager at the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities. So my journey it's been interesting. I graduated TCNJ in 2016, and during my time at TCNJ for undergrad, I was a major in marketing and a minor in women and gender studies. So unique there right off the bat. After graduating, I went to work for a government affairs. It was actually a law firm, but there was like a spin on, there was like a government affairs consultant practice going on there. So that's what I did for 2 years. It was really fun, but I got burnt out really quick. I was traveling a whole lot all across the US. I was working with companies such as Mars, the M&M Company, the Pingree School, Pete's Coffee, advocating on different legislative priorities that they had, whether it was candy taxes, sugar taxes, manufacturing. So if they were looking to build, Mars specifically, a new factory in Waco, Texas, I would be sent out there to scope out the location and talk with legislators and explain to them the benefits of Mars building there, and basically asking for incentives to be able to make it happen. So that was interesting, and definitely not where I envisioned myself when I graduated. I thought I was going to go work in marketing in an ad agency in the city. And I ended up in the suburbs, but it was definitely a really rewarding experience. So that's kind of where I fell in love with government. And I went to, after that, one of the lawyers actually had worked at the Board of Public Utilities, and he kind of poached me. He said he was going back, and he's like, would you come with me? And I was like, absolutely. So that's how I ended up at the board. And my first year at the board, I was actually working part-time. I was on a state salary, and I was working part-time at Pier 1. And President Foster walked in, and we were just chatting, and I was just selling her furniture. And I mentioned to her I was an alum. I was so excited. And she said, oh, you know what, like, and then TCNJ is opening up an MBA program. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. She's like, you should apply. So that's how that happened. So I ended up applying. I got in. I was part of the inaugural class. It was really such a rewarding and special experience to be part of that. I just graduated a few months ago, so very exciting. I'm not studying anymore. I would do it again in a heartbeat. I think everything just happened by chance, and it was serendipity, and it happened the way it was supposed to. It wasn't my plan. I just don't think as soon. I wanted to give myself a little bit more work experience before I pursued an MBA. I was also, part of my plan and my goal was to work for a corporation that would provide some sort of tuition reimbursement. Like Nirali mentioned, you really have to think about the financial piece, and that was critical for me as also a first-generation student and still paying for my undergrad loans. Definitely a lot to keep in mind. So I was really looking for that, but the state does have a tuition reimbursement program. Unfortunately, the timing wasn't all there. So everything was not perfect because of COVID. There were budget cuts, and naturally that affected me. So I was faced with a tough decision halfway through whether I was going to continue on without the support and the financial help of the board, or if I was just going to keep going and accrue more debt. And I kept going and accrued a little bit more debt, but I would do it again, and I'm glad to be done. And it's definitely opened a lot of doors for me in my current position, because I'm just I went from working in clean energy to very quickly being promoted to communications specialist. Now I'm a communications manager, and I'm actually interviewing next week for another position. So I definitely think it's propelled me forward. And aside from that, my journey's been unique because I don't have any experience in public policy, but I do work in government. But having an MBA, I think, has just given me the ability to participate in a different way and provide feedback to the agency in a non-traditional way. I think among my peers, we were successful, and our agency is successful because we bring our own experiences. And I think because of my training and because of my experience in government affairs as a consultant, I've been able to give a more strategic vision, and I think about things very differently. And my marketing background, I'm always kind of obsessed with making everything beautiful and professional looking, where I think sometimes in government that we don't pay much attention to that. So it's definitely been really interesting. And any tips, advice, I think just go for it. Things just kind of tend to happen when they're supposed to. I never thought that President Foster would be coming into Pier 1 and I'd be helping her furnish her house and picking pillows. And it's been rewarding, and I'm very excited for the future and for my career. And hopefully I will be a mentor again next year. This year's been a little crazy this semester, so I couldn't participate, but I have participated as a mentor for two rounds now, I think, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Geraldine, and really thank you to all of you. Bye, Nancy. Wonderful to hear about all of your experiences. I want to sort of open it up, and you can ask each other questions. But if any of the students or other guests want to start by asking questions, please feel free to chime in. I mean, I'll ask one question, which is, it was sort of brought to me by something that Ish said, which was sort of, and Geraldine, you sort of started to say what skills you brought in particular from the MBA, and Ish had talked about sort of, well, here are nuts and bolts, or what you sort of like end up doing if you're going to do an MPP. And I wonder if you all could sort of speak to the sort of biggest set of skills you feel like you got out of the particular program that you were in. And if you don't mind reminding us what that degree was when you do that, that'd be helpful. Victoria, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. So I think that the MPA degree, the Master's of Public Administration degree, is very, very similar to the MPP. Like Ish said, it was teaching you how to conduct your own research, read other people's research, and turn that into policy, and really, and it probably is the path that I chose. I learned a lot about how to write a policy proposal and how to draft memos to decision makers, which is a lot of that's what I do now. And so I think that is a lot of what I did in my program as well.
Great, thank you. And Nirala, you spoke to this a bit already, but if you don't mind sort of telling us the biggest set of skills you get from, or you've gotten from the law school experience.
Sure. So I'm just about at the halfway mark. So I can't speak to, what it's like to actually work as an attorney. But I think so far, a lot of the experience has been about learning how to do legal research and legal writing, which is sort of a really like specialized skill. I almost think of it as like you're an accountant, but with words. And like I talked about the nature of like teaching and pedagogy in law school, just to sort of emphasize like how specialized of a thing that you are learning. So something that I often do, I'm interning at a New Jersey state agency right now. I'll get a question posed to me like, okay, how does a New Jersey court like think about this issue with respect to this statute, right? And so then it'll take me 4 to 5 hours on Westlaw or LexisNexis to plug in keywords read a bunch of decisions and really digest how a particular judge or a number of judges have been talking about, let's say, housing discrimination in a particular county. And then reporting back on that in as like digestible and legible language as possible, right? Like, I'm not going to write exactly what the judge wrote. I'm going to write it how I understood it in my own words and try to convey that to my supervisor. So it's sort of a lot of translating a really complex material into language that's understandable. And that's the piece that I am really passionate about, because I think that the law can be like a black box, especially to poor people. And I think that like everyone deserves access to legal resources. So I try to spend a lot of time like thinking about legibility within the law.
Great. There's some threads here that are similar, right? So Victoria and Ish both sort of saying that, you know, a lot of the Masters of Public Policy or Public Administration sort of translating academic research into for policymakers, right, or into policy. And as Nirali, you're saying that in some ways, right, the work that happens at law school is sort of, or at least sort of taking those skills from law school and applying them is in many ways translating law and legal decisions to legible or digestible language for people to use. Great. Ish, do you want to speak any more to that? You sort of inspired that question, but if you have more to add to that, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I think the only additional thing I would add is one of my biggest takeaways as policy analysts. I think the nature, because like it's not just understanding, it's like I think like a way of thinking that I didn't necessarily get from my legislative experience, just like thinking about like the long-term effects. Like it's like a class on state and local budget, like all those like just thinking about like policy as like the full round from like the regulations to the implementation, like the entire like I think one of the biggest things just it gave a language to a lot of what you would experience in like legislator working in politics, like policy windows and stuff like that. I think the insight is like, or just like the understanding of additional way to explain it was like another thing I would add to like what Victoria said about being able to translating, just also like having that language and the lingo to be like, hey, like this is what like me and Catherine might say, like, oh, like lame duck and like this bill has momentum. It means a policy window and like academic terms. Like I think that's the only thing I would add is that language.
Great. And every profession has their own language, right? And this and doing certain degrees, right, gives you entry into that profession with all of their language. And Geraldine, you had mentioned this idea that the MBA kind of gave you a different lens into government work. Can you tell us more about the actual skills that you were taking from it? What did you get from that MBA that did that?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I often think that running a government is like running a business. I think there's a lot of similarities there, whether we have a finance department, we have our communications department. So I do see a lot of similarities. And through the MBA program, there were a lot of group projects that require teamwork. And I think that in my agency, especially, I see that it can be very siloed. And the BPU is a quasi-judicial regulatory agency. So we oversee the utility companies, we have a clean energy division, we oversee the water companies, telecommunications, so Verizon, Comcast of the world, reliability and security. So there's so many different divisions within our agency that I feel like after getting my MBA and while I was pursuing my MBA, I was able to take like a 2,000-foot view and see how everything fits together. And I definitely do feel that I've been instrumental in, especially on the marketing end of things, being able to just connect the dots and really call attention to all the great work that we're doing, as opposed to just highlighting one division, whether it's clean energy, because the governor's really hot on offshore wind right now, and solar and renewable, 100% renewable by 2050. So I definitely think I think my policy friends, I call them my subject matter experts, they're amazing. They're amazing. They come to me, they're like, Jared, this great program, this idea. I'm like, okay, well, let's pare it down. Let's make it a little bit more digestible so we can communicate it to ratepayers and to New Jersey residents, all the great things we're doing. Because I think it's very easy when you work in policy to get caught up in all the exciting things and the details and the nitty gritty. But sometimes they'll explain something to me, I'm like, I don't even know what you just said. So break it down for me, and then we can translate it and make it into a really impactful communications piece.
Wonderful. That's so helpful. I feel like I'm learning so much, and so great. Let me ask again, do other people have questions for our panelists?
I have a question. So I'm graduating in a couple of weeks, and I want to sort of kind of see what was sort of kind of like your steps that you took right after graduation. Did you immediately start applying? Did you reach out to contacts in your network? Yeah.
And I'll just let you take that as that sort of question came up in my own notes, was sort of like, some of you said, it was really hard to apply because I was doing this and I was doing this, right? And like, maybe if you can break down like what makes it so hard and what makes it so time consuming, and maybe as Janelle asked, sort of like, can you tell us what your exact steps were on the way towards applying? I think that could be really helpful. And yeah, go ahead to jump in as you'd like.
I can jump in. I think my biggest tip and advice would be to tap your network and even family, friends. My first job at that government affairs firm was through my brother's soccer coach's friend, and we met on the soccer field, and he brought me in for an interview, and I ended up being there for 2 years, and it was a great experience. So you really just never know who you can meet and who is willing to give you an opportunity. I think in terms of like the first steps, I'm sure you'll agree, the worst part about applying to jobs is that whole like resume cover letter process, and it's so tedious. This is how the systems are. You have a resume and you upload it and you have to like fix everything because it's jumbled. So I would say just carve out some time. So make it where I have like alarms on my phone, and even recently when I'm always looking for jobs, and I think it's always great to interview and get those and work on those skills, because if you don't work on them, you lose them. So when it's time to look for a job, you're not as polished. So I encourage you to just always keep applying and interview, even if you don't intend to take the job. But definitely carve out some time and do it in bits. So have mini goals for yourself. When I was first starting out and before this family friend came along, I would carve out 45 minutes and say, today I want to apply to at least 2 jobs, and make them similar enough where you don't have to change cover letters too drastically. And just having those goals for yourself are just so important, because you'll feel so much better about it. Write it down, apply to 1 job this week and check it off at the end of the week. Versus if you're like, you start feeling so overwhelmed where you're feeling pressure from family, from friends, from professors, and everybody wants to know where you are, where you're going, and what you're doing. So definitely don't listen to any of that. I think my mom was always like, oh, you're home again? Like you're not working? What are you doing? So it's tough. And I mean, everybody's kind of in the same boat when graduation comes along. So definitely just write down your goals and check them off, and stay positive and stay encouraged.
Thanks. And just to jump in, you said, use your network. And I think for a lot of undergraduate students are like, I don't have a network, right? Like, I don't, what's a network? And so in some ways, the one thing I'll say, and I tend to say this a lot to my students, is talk to people. Just talk to, and that's clear that Geraldine was doing that, right? She was talking to Dr. Foster about what she was up to, right? She was talking to the coach, here's what I'm thinking about. But if you have to talk to people, as uncomfortable as that can be. I think the more people you're talking to about your interests, talk to your professors. Your professor might know somebody who's working at this place or this place. That's how you build a network, right? And that can be intimidating, but I think that's one of those steps you have to start with to sort of build that network. Great. Others of you that wanted to jump in on those sort of more precise steps of applying, et cetera.
I think to add on to your point about the networking piece, because like that was a big, people always say like network, and I never got it. So like for me, what helped is like a point of connection or a point of similarity to jump off from always helps to calm my nerves. Like everyone that went to TCNJ, I'll feel a little more comfortable going up to, because like we both went to TCNJ. Like anyone that went to Rutgers, I'll be a little bit more comfortable. Like we both went to TCNJ. Like if someone said that they were like any kind of similarity I can identify, characteristic I can identify, I always like feel more comfortable going up to them. And it's that extra confidence always helps. So I would just add that part. As it relates to like graduating and like useful tips, I think the biggest thing is just kind of like make a plan, stick to it and be patient. A lot of things don't move when we want it to move. It's like do have to wait on other people and kind of wait for things to happen. So like make a plan, be consistent with it, but also be patient with yourself, and like everything will fall into place. Like do what you can now, but also understand like a lot of the things that you want is gonna take a while for it to get. Because I was recently I graduated in May, looking for a full-time job, and I was like reaching out to all these people working my network, and I was applying to all these different jobs, and none of it, like I went like a month and a half, maybe 2 months without getting a job. And like, as you're saying, like, well, but I was like, I'm doing everything right. I met all these people. Like, why don't I have a job? Like, why am I getting accruing debt? But like, just having that patience and like waiting for everything to fall into place. I think that's like a huge part.
Yeah, and I would also like to add, aside from having a plan and networking, is like, don't think that you're bothering somebody if you want to reach out to them. Most people are more than willing to share any sort of like advice or experience that they have, that they can help somebody else. I know I love it when people want to hear about, what it was like to go to grad school, and I really I know that when I had graduated from grad school, I had a friend who wanted to go to grad school, and she was asking me about the process, and she was afraid to reach back out to her advisor from TCNJ because it had been a couple of years, and this, that, and the other, and she didn't want to bother him. But most people are more than willing to, if not spend the time with you, they'll give you resources that can help. Sorry, that's my dog.
Yeah, I also just wanted to add, like, I totally echo all the like person-to-person networking, but also like don't be afraid to make use of online resources. Like I remember after graduation, I was practically living on idealist.org, which is a job board for people who are interested in public service. You can find like volunteering opportunities there. The other thing I did was like tons of LinkedIn stalking. Like I am someone who's very shameless about LinkedIn stalking. And basically what I like to do is find a couple people who I really admire, who are in positions that I would one day like to be, and just like take notes on, what job they did after graduation. And if I'm seeing any particular patterns, like taking note of that and saying like, okay, well, clearly this is the path that would be right for me. Right now, I'm seeing that a lot of law students who are interested in public interest work, they do like a fellowship after graduation. So now I know like, okay, well, that might be on the horizon for me. So yeah, don't be afraid to, again, like cold email people, message people on LinkedIn if you need more information. But even without talking to people, I think you can amass a lot of information about like what is the right step for you.
I love that. Oh, go ahead, Victoria.
No, Nirali reminded me what I wanted to say. It was informational interviews. I never thought that was something that I would do. but or that would be useful to me. But before I had even gone back to school, I cold emailed somebody who went to TCNJ and was working in a job that I thought that I might like to have one day. And he was more than willing to sit down and talk to me and tell me all about his experience. And it not only did it help me get an idea of like what I wanted to do, but it's also working on your interview skills, working on your networking skills. They're really, really useful. And I highly recommend them, even if you are somebody who's like anxious and, shy, just they're worth it.
I love that advice. I love all that advice. I think, there's sort of this tension between, there's so many different paths to get where you want to go. There's no question about that. I think this panel has shown that. At the same time, these paths have been worn before. So look how people have done them. And I think, I certainly did that, before getting my PhD. I sort of like, who's doing something I would want to do? What did that path look like for them? And so if people, you don't have to reinvent the wheel by taking a different route. You can sort of see how things have been laid out before. And yet there's lots of different ways of doing things and getting to that same point. So I think that those two messages have been quite clear here. I want to respect people's time at this really crazy time of year. Are there any sort of last remarks? And Catherine, did you want to weigh in on anything or chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to first and foremost thank all of our panelists for being here tonight, just for taking the time out of your busy evenings to speak to our students. I started this program because I saw kind of a void in the connection between mentoring TCNJ political science students or just liberal arts students. So I wish that in hindsight, we would have had, I could have heard from you guys 4 or 5 years ago. So I really do hope that the students who join us tonight found this to be valuable. And I know that some of our panelists dropped their emails into the chat. So like everyone said tonight, we love to network. We love to connect. It might be intimidating at first, but don't ever hesitate to reach out to anybody. And if you ever need my contact information or you want me to facilitate an introduction between you and somebody else too, I am more than happy to do so. So just wanted to, thank everybody and really, really appreciate your time.
And I'm going to echo that. Thank you all for being here. Panelists, really, really appreciate you coming out to talk to everybody. Students and alum and mentors and mentees, thank you for being here and being interested. And Catherine, thank you as always. You are amazing and a force. So thanks everybody for joining us and have an excellent night. And we'll have more on the horizon, but thanks again for being here.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.